We are holding on page, let's find the first page over here. Um, yeah, we're holding on page Yud Tes, Ois Daled, line 7. So after speaking about that the joust that will take place when Mashiach comes, about with the different types of the Leviathan with the Shoit Habar, etc. So we we said that the testing it with the snapirim, the fins of the Leviathan, will raise up the tzaddikim that they are involved in physical things, and they will raise it up to a higher level because they are nunayama. They are those types of um, tzaddikim that are completely immersed in ruchnias, and their whole avoida is an avoida dealing with the most spiritual things and removed from this world, etc., etc. So in that vein, you're going to connect it now to Parshas Torah, which is this week's extra parsha that we're going to be learning because of, or not learning, but we are adding from the Dalit Parshas. What is Dalit? Yes, Lakash is in Parshas Torah. We can connect it with Parshas Torah, current words explaining the Torah, Parshas Chukas, and Parshas Chukas, which is where Parshas Torah is taken from. He explains the Inyan Para Aduma, concerning the Para Aduma, that says concerning its Zoiskok Torah. This is the Chukah of the Torah. So the question is, why is it called Chukas HaTorah? Why is it considered the law and the statute of the Torah? Seemingly, it's just one statute. It's not the entire Torah. In other places, when we find the word Chukas referred to a mitzvah, we will refer to that particular mitzvah. We'll say, Zois Chukas HaPesach, for example, it says. We say this is the Chukah of the Pesach. Why over here by Parah do we say this is the Chukah of the Torah? In other words, indicating that the Parah Aduma is something very basic or encompassing the entire Torah or expressing the entire Torah. So the Alter Rebbe explains in the Torah, that's Takaso, because the mitzvah of Parah Aduma is the general part of the Torah. Close in the mitzvahs whom the general idea of mitzvahs is that through that comes onto the person the level of rushing and returning. Like it says, if your heart rushes, in other words, rushes meaning pulling towards Hashem, drawing towards Hashem, so then you should return it to one. This is what it says when you say Yitzira, that your heart is running. So that is the idea of the rushing towards Hashem with love. This is the element of fire that's in the heart. And afterwards, return to one. What is the idea of return? What's the idea of shuv? That's the level of where you're drawing back. You're in awe of Hashem. You're in fear of Hashem. You're not pulling towards, which is the emotion, the level of love, but you're drawing back from Hashem. That's bittul. That is the element of water. Water is not the passionate running and drawing upwards, but it's descending below. It's coming down. It's calming. And these levels of Ratzi B'Shuv, the Ava V'Yira, we arrive at that through the entire Torah, which is the fulfillment of mitzvahs. Where do we see that mitzvahs encapsulate both these things? It says, from his right, there is a fiery law. So we see the law of the Torah, the mitzvahs, has the level of right and has the level of fire. The right, that's the level of Hashem's chesed, kindness. That's the level of the level of love, the level of ratzui. That's the level of that's the level of ava. Then there's the level of the gam age dust, that's water, the gam age dust. Then there's the fiery law, that there's a level of fire. Fire is the level of gvura, the level of yira, the level of I'm sorry, did I say the level? I mixed up a few things over here. The level of water, that's the level of shuv, that's the level of return, that's the descent down here below. That's the level of, in this case, yiro bittel. The level of fire is the attraction and pulling upwards towards Hashem. Shekluli with elu, that Torah is made up of these two levels. By days the Yavya Adam the B'chinas Ratzi v'Shuv, through this a person will arrive at a state of Ratzi and Shuv. Shehem B'chinas Eishum Mayim, that the Ratzi and Shuv are the fire and water. Shem Klolos HaTorah, that is the general idea of Torah. Shal Davar Zeh Hus to Kol HaMitzvos, on the fire and water, on the Ratzi and Shuv was founded and based all the mitzvahs. That's the idea of the mitzvah of paraduma that also combines the idea of fire and water. The ratzi is the burning the para into ashes. That's the fiery aspect of it. The level of shuv is that placing upon. What do we do with the ashes? You have to put the living well water, the living spring water, you put on it upon these ashes into a vessel. Therefore, specifically by paraduma, it says because the mitzvah of paraduma, by the fire and the ashes and the water, indicate this type of combination of both things together. Before being my Mazal, similar to what's explained in what the Chazal say, is better the talk and the speech of the servants of the houses of the forefathers than from the teachings in the Torah of the children. Where do we see this? Shari Parsha Yezer full of Torah, because the whole story Yezer with Rivka is repeated in the Torah, even though there's no great halachas over there, there's no great mitzvahs in there. Still, in all, it's repeated twice when he tells both what he's going to do, and then he repeats two, or when the Torah says what he did, and then when he repeats it to Rivka's family. Harbe, top of the next page. Many harbe gufa Torah loy nitnu elam. There is many bodies of Torah. Bodies of Torah is the way the Chazal call the halacha. Halacha is called body of Torah. So these bodies of Torah are only given in a hint. You have an extra letter, an extra word, all of a sudden you learn out halachas from it. So when it comes to halacha, the Torah is like, if you will, to use an expression, cheap on words. It's very minimal on words. When it comes to a matter of not Torah, when the matter of stories of the servants of the Avos over there, he goes on and on and on. Why is that? So it's brought down in Chassidus, because it's not just because it's the story, but it's what the content of the story represents. That's because the story of Eliezer concerning the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, it's the idea of the joining of Shem Ban with Shem Ma. Yitzchak and Rivka is the first marriage that's related to in the Torah and related about in the Torah. So this marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka is symbolic of the general idea of marriage in general, that marriage in general is a combination, that's the level of the mashpia, which is represented by Shema, coming down and joining with the Mekabel, which is the idea of Ban. So therefore, the truth is that this encapsulates the entire idea of Torah, because Shazel Klolos Hachibur de Ma'uban, I'm sorry, Shazel Ina Torah B'Ksav Torah Sh'Balpeh. The level of Torah B'Ksav, that's mashpia, because that's what gives, and that comes also from the level of Chachma. Chachma is Torah B'Ksav. Torah B'Alpeh is the level of Malchus, has to do with the mouth. That's the level of the Mekabel. So the yichud of Ma'oban, which is the chasen of Yitzchak and Rivka represent, is really something that has to do with the entire Torah. So close achibur the Ma'oban, ubechol mitzvah, ubederech prat. In every mitzvah, there is the union of Ma'oban that we accomplished, the union of the Mashpia and the Makab, but that's in a specific, detailed manner. The union that takes place in that mitzvah is in a specific, detailed manner. But the chasana of Yitzchak and Rivka represent the union of Ma'oban in a very general manner. Therefore, that's why the Torah gave such importance and emphasis to tell over the whole entire story twice and so on, because it represents and has in it and contains the entire idea of Torah. So just like concerning the idea of Ma'oban, there's given a lot of importance to the story of the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, because that's the yichud of Ma'oban, and Ma'oban is something central and inclusive of the entire Torah, which is a yichud of Ma'oban. In a similar fashion, we're going to call Para Aduma the chuk of the entire Torah. Let's see it inside, line 7 on page Kaf. So too, it's also concerning the Para Aduma. Concerning the Para Aduma, it says, this is the chuk of the Torah, through the ashes and the living waters. Nasa close becomes a general joining of being drawn towards Hashem and the return from Hashem. That's the general idea of Torah, like we said before. The foundation upon which the whole Torah is based on and that results in is that pulling towards Hashem and returning from Hashem. Though in every mitzvah you have also Ratzi Vishuv, but it's only in a specific manner, whereas Para Aduma encapsulates in a very general manner, and therefore it's called Zois Chukas HaTorah. Any questions before we go on? Okay, we're holding on page Chav, line 12, Ois Hey. We continues to explain the Torah of our parsha. Going back to the original topic, the Gael Shchita Shred Habar lost Lovik, it's not period of Shalav Yasin, concerning the slaughtering of the wild ox in Mashiach's times with the fins of the Leviathan. Even though these days this is considered a blemished slaughtering, because there is the hefsek, the separations, there's the stoppages over here. There is something that is called, that makes it like cut off. It makes, because there's like serrated or ridges, so it's not a smooth cut. There are, but when you cut with a serrated knife or something that has edges or teeth, so it's like cut, stop, cut, stop, cut, stop. That is not a kosher shchita these days. But in the future, tzarech liyas kain daf. It actually has to be this way. It must be this way. Because, as we said earlier in the Maimer, the idea of this shchita is the elevation and ascent of this shoyr habar, which is those tzaddikim that are involved in the physical world, to go up through the Leviathan, which is the level of tzaddikim that are out of this world, that are involved in yichudim al-yonim, and they're completely immersed in spirituality, that through the shechting, with its fins, it elevates it, like we spoke about yesterday. That's why in that type of shchita, there has to be a serrated type of cutting tool. It has to be something that there are steps and stoppages in every cut. Because when you're dealing about elevating in such a manner, you cannot have all the elevations in one shot. It has to be step by step. It's known, there are many chambers that it has to go through. We actually is called all these, but it can't be all the elevations in one time. There has to be a separation between one chamber and another chamber. Therefore, when Mashiach comes, Hashem will allow for this type of blemish in the knife, even though these days such a knife would completely not be kosher for shchita, but then it will be necessary, and that's why Torah Chadash and Mititaitze, there will be a new Torah that will allow for such a knife to be used. In the Torah, it's explained the reason that we just now said why there has to be a separations in the knife, why there has to be serrated or teeth and so on. In the mimer that we referred to before from the Mittler Rebbe, that he speaks over there in that mimer of the Teres Chaim, he explains why these days a shchita is not kosher if there is hefsekim, if there is serrated and so on, if it's a knife that has some type of nick in it. The idea behind this is the Hinin Zbar Elsif Gimel B'Teres Chaim. We explained previously in the mimer. We brought down the third ice of our previously in the mimer from the Teres Chaim. She'inyan Haliyai Snapira Alav and the idea of the ascent that takes place through the fins of the Leviathan, who ba'open shel rotzi v'shoyvitz, in a way, like we said before, through rushing and returning. Aliyah v'yerida. You need to have the ascent, and then you need to have the descent. That's the connection that we were talking about with Parshas Parah, because we were talking about ascent and descent. Mamshech Levayer, and he continues over there in Teres Chaim to explain. Though the primary fulfillment of mitzvahs is with love and awe, in a way of rushing towards Hashem and also returning. Just like we explained in Eis Dalet this morning about the Parah Aduma, its idea of rushing towards Hashem and returning. Therefore, it's called the chukah of the entire Torah. Despite that there's Rotzi V'Shuv, Aliyah V'Yerida, Eina Shchita Ksheda Basakin, She'osu Charitzin B'Gimesh Sheyesh Aliyah V'Yerida. A shchita knife is not kosher if it's such a type of knife that's made in a way of serrated and it has nicks. That means that there is an elevation and a descent, meaning there's a cut and then a stop, which shows an elevation and descent. Only specifically in a smooth knife that has no nicks that whatsoever. Because now the main purpose of our avoided these days is to separate between good and bad, which of course will be seen Parsha Seinu, like it's written at the conclusion of our Parsha, to separate between that which is impure and that which is pure. That is our avoided these days. That encapsulates, even though over there he's talking about the halachas of kashrus, but that's in general encapsulates what our avoid has to be now. There shouldn't be a way how the bad should be able to nurse from the good. How does the bad nurse from the good? So it nurses taking from the external part of the vessels of chesed and gvura, that since in the external part of the vessels, therefore over there was a mixture that came about of the Eitzadas Toivara. So our job is to separate the good from the bad. When we're dealing with the pneumius level, when we're dealing with the lights and the revelations, over there, it's total goodness that doesn't even allow for any type of ra to come out from it. But when you're dealing with the external part of the vessels, so over there, it already begins a process that allows and brings towards the chas v'shalom that it can come down the level of bad. And therefore, our job is to remove that and to cut off any type of connection, any type of association that there's possible to be with bad. That's the general idea of mitzvahs and the mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lois aseh. The mitzvahs aseh is about pulling and taking out the good that's embedded in the bad, the good that's embedded in klippas noiga, and the mitzvahs lois aseh is cutting off so that the klippa cannot nurse anymore from kedusha. If chas v'shalom, a person transgresses a lois aseh, so then the klippa can nurse from that. So he says, also lishvit besakim pogum. That's why it's prohibited to shecht and slaughter with a blemished knife. Because it's known sheikir sibus isavas hakelim he mistalkus mispashtus b'kensarotzu v'shuv daf. How does the kelim come about? Kelim is a certain amount of distance and separation from Hashem. How does that distance become created? When the oiros are in the way of rotzi v'shuv, so the fact that it pulls forward and then it pulls back, so then it allows for something to be at a distance from Hashem. If it would be constantly in a state of joining with Hashem, so then there wouldn't be able to be kelim. But because it pulls back, it's shuv, so that allows now for something outside of the realm or distant from the Eibishter to come into being, the level of the kelim. Through the light settling or resting down below. After the leaving upwards, the pulling upwards, then become limited in the vessel, and not just does it become the vessel itself, but also the external part of the vessel. Until it could be the external part of the vessel. That from the external part of the vessel descends the hashpah very, very. Till even the external ones are able to nurse and receive the hashpah from Hashem. The similarity to this of the oil being in a way of rotzi v'shuv, that is when you have a nick and a missing part in the knife. So then there is an elevation and going down. It's going up and going down. From this, eventually could be nursing the life force for the difficult levels of severity. All of this is specifically now. It's impossible to be a complete eradication of the bad. Only what could be is it's being separated from the good, like we said before. But when Mashiach comes, be fulfilled the promise that the spirit of Tumah will remove from the land. Then even from the Shuv, there won't be able to be the possibility for the klippas to be yonik from it and nurse from it. And therefore, when Mashiach comes, when the Shod Habar will be elevated through the Leviathan, so then they could be elevated in the ways of Rotzi V'Shuv. But these days, where the main thing is separating good from bad, we don't want to have that type of Rotzi V'Shuv, because that in that particular situation, obviously, there is cases where Rotzi V'Shuv is good. But in that particular situation, the Rotzi V'Shuv can lead to a situation of the Chitzonim getting their Unika to nurse their life. Any question? Bottom of page Chaf Aleph, line 29 is up. There still needs examination and explanation. The matter is the Lechura, seemingly, since the idea of Shchita cannot be in a way of rushing and returning, since from this can come out that the clippers will nurse from it. How could it be at all the avoida of Rotzi V'Shuv, which I alluded to before, that there is a difference between Shchita and other avoidas? Question is why? There should not be any Rotzi V'Shuv because you're worried about the clippers taking your nikah, just like you're worried about if the sakin shchita has in it aliyas v'yeridus, so then it will be rotzi v'shuv, and then the clippers will be able to get from it. Ma'u achiluk bein inyan hashchita l'klos avodah shel l'chayrehem b'yivim sh'seisim delzeh. What's the difference between the level of shchita and the general avodah that seemingly are in such a manner that contradict each other? Be'ein loymar she'inyan arotzi v'shuv tzarich lis klos avodah b'nefsha adam. We can't say like this. That the rotzi v'shuv that has to be in the general avodah, that is a positive thing and that is something that's encouraged. That's within the person's soul. We're talking about internally. When you're talking about shchita, you're taking something outside of you. You're taking something within the person, not within, I'm sorry, outside of the person. In the world, you're trying to be mavar, you're trying to elevate. So since you're dealing with the world, when you're dealing with the world, you have to be extra cautious. Then the external ones can nurse from the level of Ratzi V'Shuv. So he says, that's not a good enough answer. Why? The idea of Ratzi V'Shuv that's in Paraduma, she close that's the general level of Torah. He close Torah mitzvahs canal. Since in such a manner as the general avoid of Torah mitzvahs, like we said before, it's also concerning refining the power of desire that's in the animal soul. That's the idea of the burning of the paraduma, that is something that's becoming refined. That we're saying that when a person burns the paraduma, he has to burn out the desire to negative. He has to completely eradicate that desire, that the fire of the nefesh habaham should be eradicated, and all that remains is the ashes. So therefore, the paraduma is also an internal type of service, and so therefore, but it's not just something that's in the soul powers within the person's soul of his nefesh elokis, but it's also something external. The nefesh habahamis is also considered external enough that needs to be refined, and where klippus can have a yanika from. So the Rebbe leaves it with a shaila. I only come to comment that people should examine and think into this matter, and they should put an effort to find an answer for these matters in such a way that a person would rather be successful and have his own measure than 9 measures in someone else. In other words, the Rebbe says, if I come up with the answer and give it to you, so then that's like something that I give you a gift. A person doesn't appreciate as much a gift as he appreciates something that he worked for on himself by his own. He said, you work on this, the Rebbe is telling us, figure out the question, and then you'll have this maila of Adam Reitz B'Kav Shaloy. A person wants their own measure much more than 9 measures of someone else. Even if after all this examination, one will not come to reaching a conclusion. So therefore, in other words, I'm going to think to myself, the Rebbe doesn't have an answer. Why should I put in an effort? I'm not going to reach a conclusion anyway. So the Rebbe says, don't worry. So he says, in the meantime, there will be the advantage of putting in effort and toil in the study of Chassidus. So then his Chacham Bina B'das of his soul becomes connected with the inner level of the Chacham Bina B'das of the Ein Sof, which is actually the difference between studying Nigla and studying Pnimis HaTorah. Studying Nigla, we are connecting with a more external level, because that's the level of godliness that's enclosed in the external understanding of Nigla the Torah, dealing with physical matters of this world. Studying Pnimis HaTorah connects us with a higher level. So therefore, by putting in effort and toil in trying to find out something in Pnimis HaTorah, reach a much higher level. And that's the goal of the center of Neshama down here below. To put an effort and toil in the study of the inner part of the Torah. So therefore, it's not about the destination. It's not about coming to a conclusion. It's not about finding the answer. It's the means and it's the way and it's the road that you're taking to put in the effort. By days as through that we merit to the level that no eye has seen Hashem except for you. He will do to those that await Him, meaning those that are mechakaloi. So it's brought down in Zohar, Laman the Dochkin, the Daikin B'mil the Chmas, so those that put an effort in matters of wisdom. In other words, when we put an effort in studying the inner part of the Torah, so then we connect with the Eibishter in an utmost greatest way, and we're Zohar to the level of Mashiach's times and Mashiach's revelations.